Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. So before I introduce this episode, I have some exciting news for you Authority File listeners. We have a new podcast coming. It's called Patron Driven, and it's a narrative-style podcast that brings you crowdsourced library stories where the personal meets the professional. Season 1 is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey and the 2 years it took to rebuild. Patron Driven debuts on June 22nd, wherever you get your podcasts. You can visit our website at choice360.org and click on the librarianship dropdown to sign up for our newsletters and to find bonus and teaser content for the new program. Okay, so back to the Authority File. In the next 4 episodes of this podcast, we're going to be talking about open access monographs. More specifically, I'll be joined by 2 guests from MIT Press, which, thanks to an $850,000 grant from the Arcadia Fund, is embarking on a 3-year project to develop a financial framework and sustainable business plan for publishing OA monographs, a business plan that virtually any university press can implement. If the University Press mission is to distribute knowledge and research as broadly as possible, then many in the market are increasingly looking to open access as a way to support that mission to its fullest. Print monograph unit sales have plummeted in the last 20 years, clearly impeding that mission and causing presses to be more dependent on subsidies or other subventions, as well as trade and journal-based editorial strategies to remain viable. Joining me for the next 4 episodes will be Terry Ehling, Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT Press, and Raim Crow, a Senior Consultant at Spark, who is working with MIT Press on its OA Publishing Model Initiative. In this first episode, Terry and Raim provide an overview of the monograph publishing ecosystem, MIT Press's place within that, and describe some of the OA monograph publishing already taking place. All right, Raim and Terry, welcome to the program. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
All right. So I'd like to start just with some discussion, sort of setting the stage discussion, talking about the general monograph market and OA monographs in particular, and sort of why they're actually a thing. And then we'll move into MIT's Press's particular experience and involvement in that aspect as well. So maybe to start, Terry and Raim, either one of you can go first, but if you can give us an overview of what you see as the scholarly monograph publishing market ecosystem. I know you've said that, for example, back in the 90s, a press could count on sales of about 1,500 copies per title. And now that's way down to 300 to 500 per title. Is that kind of where we're at now?
Yeah, more or less. So, about a generation ago now, a typical university press could expect to sell a typical HSS, meaning humanities and social science, monograph, about 1,500 copies. And we could achieve break even. Most university presses do a 3-year profit and loss statement in advance of publication. And so out of the box what your costs are going to be. What you don't know is what your revenues will be. But, in the old days, you could feel fairly confident that your revenues and your costs would not be asymptotic. And what we have right now, unfortunately, is what the venture capitalists might say is a lack of product market fit. So there's been a market failure, and conventional market-based models are no longer adequate to support the value-added publication of a conventional scholarly monograph. And by value adds, we usually mean things like copy editing, proofing, design, formatting, marketing. Those are all human-intensive activities. It's very hard to drive costs down along those vectors. Supply chain management and other production and manufacturing components, there have been concerted efforts over the last couple of decades to drive costs out of the system, and that's been fairly successful. And the reasons for this market decline, which have again been underway for at least 50 years, are actually pretty complex. And we can talk about the serials crisis, the increase in annual title output by university presses and other scholarly publishers, and in the number of novel scholarly products and databases that are competing for dollars.
Hmm.
And that includes trends in how collection development budgets are allocated, and shifts in field-based scholarly output from within the academy.
Yeah. You mentioned a lack of, I think I'm getting this correct, a lack of product fit,
Yeah.
or product market fit to coin the venture capital term that you were talking about. What what does that mean?
Well, it means that again, a generation ago, we had a product that actually had a fit in the marketplace, that the marketplace was responsive to the supply. The demand
Mhm.
and supply were basically in sync. There was a sense of parity. And that's no longer true. When you need to spend upwards of $17,000 or $25,000 to produce as a first copy cost, to produce a book, a typical scholarly monograph, and you cannot recoup that cost through revenue and sales
Yeah.
in the marketplace, then you no longer have product market fit.
Okay, gotcha.
Um, and
And
again, what we're dealing with here is in traditional scholarly publishing, as defined by monographs and journals. This is actually a mature, no growth industry right now.
mhm,
There's probably no place that we can go. We can maintain a kind of tenuous, steady state, but there's no growth to be had. And I don't know, Raim, if you want to add to that in any way, based on your view.
Sure. I just add that digital dissemination has really changed the market dynamic as well. I mean, before institutions would purchase monographs if they were collected in an area, knowing that the title would go out of print. Once you start disseminating digitally, titles don't go out of print. You can move to models like paving-driven demand and those other kinds of delayed demand models, which work really well for libraries and work far less well for the publishers themselves. So that's a dynamic that also affects the market.
yeah. So Terry, it was interesting to hear you say that the monograph market has kind of shifted into this mature, no growth phase, and then just hearing Reem talk about sort of the sort of digital publishing having an impact on the model as well. It's not too hard to think that, well, why didn't digital provide some kind of new opportunity and sort of prevent or delay, this phase of being a no growth um, industry right now for monograph publishers.
I did initially,
Yeah.
but the costs that don't flatten very well, those that involve human effort and intervention, and that
Mm,
cannot be, like a better word, roboticized in any way,
yeah.
those don't go away. Those are still very much there. Readers and authors still value copy editing. They still value good design and formatting, even in a digital format. And there's still a need for marketing. You
Yeah.
still need to be able to talk about and brood about new material when you have that coming down the pike.
Right.
And it's hard to control those costs and recover them. And you're also replacing some of the non-print components, those costs, with costs related to technology.
Yes. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that
those are
actually.
actually escalating.
Right. And I imagine in sort of the legacy production process, publishers have pretty much squeezed out every cost they could at this point. I mean, there's only so far you can really take that.
I think that's right. I'd like to think that there is more that could be done over the next 10 or 20 years as technology changes, as machine learning, artificial intelligence, other things that are occurring kind of around the edges that may have more impact on the center of our business begin to
Okay.
evolve. But right now,
Right.
no. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So wondering if we can just drill down a little bit and talk about MIT Press's experience within this broader ecosystem that we just described. Are you having a similar experience, different experience? What's been going on at your press?
Well, MIT Press is one of the largest U.S. university presses. There are the Association of University Presses has what they call there are 4 tiers, 4 groups. Group 4 is largest, Group 1 is the smallest. We are a Group 4 press. There are, I believe, 6 or 7 of us. So it's a very short head and a very long tail.
Mm-hmm.
Our annual revenues are about 28 million a year, just to give you an idea of our scale and scope. We currently publish between 90 and 100 what we can consider hardcore scholarly monographs annually. And about a third, they account for about a third of our total output, title output, on an annual basis. But the MIT Press is somewhat unique among university presses in that we are STEM, or rather STEAM inflected. And by that I mean we publish in computer science, cognitive science, neuroscience, linguistics, economics, and architecture. And although we do publish works in the humanities and qualitative social sciences, most of our acquisitions efforts are focused on domains that reflect MIT's, the Institute's disciplinary strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So very technology focused.
Okay. You mentioned annual revenues of about 28 million. Are you able to break that down a little bit for us? And you mentioned the 90 to 100 monographs that you produce a year is about a third of title output.
Yeah, it's well over to, let's say, close to 300 books a year, including
Okay.
reprints. And we currently publish 42 journals. And again, half those journals are in STEM areas. Um, I can't, off the back of my, uh, I can't actually tell you what the breakdown is in terms of 2/3, 1/3
Yep.
revenue. It's probably 2/3 books, 1/3 journals in terms of where our revenues are coming from right now.
Okay. Okay. Um, and then just small tangent I was curious about. You mentioned that MIT Press focuses on subject areas and disciplines that sort of track to MIT, the institution. I think this is where some presses or institutional expectations of some presses may not be, other presses may not be in line. They may think that their presses should be publishing more of their own subject area expertise or their own faculty, and I think we've seen some recent friction in that area. Is there anything you'd like to comment on that, or is it kind of?
Well, many of the smaller university presses and even some mid-sized presses have always published in what we call regionalia and
Yeah.
have very strong lists in those areas as well, which gives them a unique market position.
Hmm.
But for the most part, they're also competing more broadly, particularly in history.
Hmm.
And in some subdisciplines within literature, they are competing with each other for books as well as
Yeah.
for journals. About a third of the university presses publish journals, so not every university press has that kind of program. And traditionally, those university presses that do publish both books and journals are a little bit healthier financially because of the ongoing revenue that you can count on from journal subscriptions.
Right. It's a little
Um,
more diversified. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay, so let's dive into sort of the open monograph concept here, and there's a lot of this has been going on. There seems to be several major players already with platforms in the market. But I'm curious, like, if we could talk about why this is even um, happening. I mean, what are some of the scholarly forces and market forces that are driving this interest and this push into OA monograph models to start with?
Yeah, so I think this is partly influenced by, of course, a decades-long trend toward OA on the journal side.
Yeah.
And that's really now catching up with books. But the failure of the market model for monographs is also a significant factor.
Hmm.
So we need to pursue a different way of financing the publication of long-term works and long-form works, especially first books by young scholars pursuing tenure-track careers inside the academy. And I'll ask Raim to also comment here because he's been so deeply involved with OA, both books and journals, for decades as well. And has a
Sure.
review on this.
Sure. Well, one of the certainly in Europe and UKRI and the UK, there's a open mandate push for publishing open monographs. So it's especially effective or impactful in the UK, where for the research assessment exercise, faculty are expected to publish their monographs open, starting with the next exercise. And there's some of those some other policies in Europe, and often these mandate policies precede any plan for the economic the funding of the mandate with kind of predictable results. So that's, I think, one of the drivers in Europe, and it's not clear the extent to which that'll be the case in the U.S., North America.
Do you think it will be the case in the US, or do you think there's any kind of mandate ahead, or it's just too early to tell, or there's really no indication just yet?
There's really I would say no indication just yet. It's always more fragmented in North America in terms of these things. So it's there may or may not be an executive order on in terms of journals. It's harder to see that kind of thing necessarily in terms of monographs. Everything's more centralized and federally funded in Europe and the UK. So that's it's just kind of the natural order of things there.
Right.
But again, even though the source of the policy and the source of the funding are the same, the timing of the mandate and the plan for funding isn't always aligned.
Okay. So I'm wondering if talk a little bit about the current state of, I guess, OA monograph publishing and the models that are out there already in practice, and then a little bit about what MIT Press is intending to do or contribute to that in some way.
Well, I can speak to some of the models that are prevalent now. If that would help. The most prevalent model seems to be, at this point, it seems to be book publishing charges, something that's analogous to APCs for journals. In that kind of model, university presses have had a long-standing practice of asking authors, for a subsidy if it's available, but it wasn't mandatory for publishing the journal. With some of the newer models, especially with commercial OA publishers, it's not a discretionary fee anymore. It's actually required, and to the extent that there aren't waivers to cover those kind of BPCs, that raises equity issues from an author access standpoint. And those kind of models also are really dependent on cost aligning with what the market will bear for BPCs. So traditional North American university presses and have an existing cost structure that may not make a low BPC possible, where Born Digital publishers can offer a lower book publishing charge sometimes. Another model you see, and all these models I should add are typically used in combination. And they're value-added additions. So the sales from the book or a value-added electronic edition, proprietary electronic edition, will provide supplemental revenue. And if the publisher's costs are low enough, then that sometimes can be a regular full on premium model, where where those revenue from value-added sales are sufficient to fund the open version. But typically that's not the case, and so there's some other kind of it's just a supplemental revenue stream. And then there are collective support models that are there are several different ones now and more coming along. So we have conditional provision models where titles are opened if there's sufficient library financial support pledged, and you see that in Unglue It and Knowledge Unlatched. There are initiatives like Lever Press, where willing Oberlin Group institutions contribute to supporting the program.
Mm-hmm.
And then other publishers, open book publishers in the UK, UC Press's Lunos offering. They also have a membership model, kind of a collective support model that supplements other revenue streams. In the case of UC Press, it's a BPC. In the case of open book publishers, it's value-added editions. And you also see institutional subsidies, which is something that's kind of baked into university presses, especially North American university presses, at least already. But then their Amherst College Press, for example, is wholly funded by the college. It's set aside funds for that. So again, all these kinds of models are mixed. You see them in various combinations.
You just heard from Terry Ehling, Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT Press, and Raim Crow, a Senior Consultant at Spark, who is working with MIT Press on its OA Monograph Publishing Initiative. This 4-part series is brought to you by MIT Press. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about MIT Press's first steps in its Arcadia-funded OA Monograph publishing plan and what they're discovering so far about the underlying economics of monograph publishing and distribution.
Some of the money is being used to offset direct and indirect costs of making approximately 50 titles, mostly frontlist titles, available immediately on our platform. So these are basically, it's a teaser program for us to be able to promote our activities and to alert the library community that we are working assiduously to try to come up with a viable model for us, while Raim works essentially behind the scenes to come up with a suite of models that we can consider and then eventually adopt.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice, and if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.